In a quiet little town in the Midwest where life moved at a slow and predictable pace, there lived a woman named Clara Bennett. She wasn't extraordinary by any stretch of the imagination, just an ordinary person trying to make ends meet. Clara worked as a librarian, spending her days surrounded by books, organizing shelves, and helping kids find their next favorite story. Her evenings were reserved for her teenage son, Ethan, who loved basketball and often teased her about being too old school. Life was simple, peaceful even. But beneath the surface, Clara carried a sense of unease. Lately, things in the neighborhood had started to change. There were whispers of break-ins happening nearby, and though nothing had happened directly to Clara or her family yet, she couldn't shake off the feeling that danger might be closer than she thought. One evening, while flipping through channels on TV, she stumbled upon a news segment about self-defense classes. Something inside her clicked. If she wanted to keep herself and her son safe, she realized she needed to take matters into her own hands. So, with a deep breath, Clara signed up for lessons at the local shooting range. The first day at the range was nerve-wracking. Clara arrived wearing an oversized hoodie and sneakers, carrying a tote bag filled with water bottles and snacks. Far cry from the confident shooters around her. Most of them looked like they belonged in action movies, decked out in tactical gear and speaking in jargon she didn't understand. They stood tall, cracked jokes, and laughed loudly, clearly enjoying themselves. Meanwhile, Clara felt small, awkward, and completely out of place. When it came time for her turn, Clara stepped up to the lane hesitantly. The instructor handed her a handgun, explaining how to hold it properly. But when she wrapped her fingers around the grip, her palms began to sweat. The weight of the weapon felt foreign in her hands and her arms trembled as she tried to aim. Everyone else made it look so easy, but for Clara, it was anything but. She pulled the trigger and the recoil nearly knocked her backward. The bullet missed the target entirely, landing somewhere far off to the side. A few chuckles rippled through the room. "Looks like we've got ourselves a rookie," one man said under his breath, just loud enough for Clara to hear. Others joined in, snickering and exchanging smirks. One guy, Ryan, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, shaking his head. "What's this? Target practice?" he quipped, earning more laughter from the group. Clara's cheeks burned red and she could feel her confidence shrinking with every passing second. But despite the embarrassment, something inside her refused to give up. She remembered why she had come here in the first place, to protect herself and her son. That thought alone kept her rooted to the spot. Ignoring the mocking voices around her, Clara steadied herself and tried again. This time, the shot landed, closer to the target, though still not close enough to impress anyone. Still, she noticed a tiny flicker of improvement. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. As the session ended and the other participants filed out, Clara lingered, behind practicing a few more rounds. She knew she wasn't good, not yet anyway, but she also knew that mastery didn't come overnight. It came from persistence, patience, and hard work. As she packed up her belongings and headed home, she reminded herself of that truth. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, especially with people like Ryan making fun of her every step of the way. But if there was one thing Clara understood, it was this. Sometimes, the most important battles are the ones you fight within yourself. And Clara was ready to win. Clara's journey at the shooting range became a routine she embraced with quiet determination. Every Saturday morning, rain or shine, she showed up early, lugging her gear and a steaming cup of coffee. At first, the other shooters barely acknowledged her presence. She was still the newbie in their eyes, someone they could mock without consequence. But Clara didn't care about their opinions anymore. She had set her sights on a bigger goal, becoming confident enough to handle herself if trouble ever came knocking. Her progress wasn't immediate, but it was steady. After weeks of practice, Clara began to notice subtle improvements. Her hands no longer shook as violently when holding the gun, and she learned how to control her breathing, a trick her instructor, Jack, emphasized repeatedly. "Steady breaths mean steady shots," he'd say, his gruff voice softened by years of experience. Clara took those words to heart, repeating them like a mantra every time she stepped up to the lane. Jack, a retired Marine with a weathered face and a kind demeanor, noticed Clara's grit. He saw something in her that others missed, not just potential, but resilience. While most beginners gave up after a few failed attempts, Clara kept coming back, week after week. One afternoon, after everyone else had left, Jack approached her. "You've got guts, kid," he said, leaning casually against the counter. "Most folks wouldn't stick around after getting laughed at like you did." Clara smiled faintly, though she knew he was right. "I'm not doing this for them," she replied simply. "I'm doing it for me, and my son." Impressed by her resolve, Jack offered to give her private tips during the quieter hours of the day. He taught her advanced techniques, like adjusting for distance and wind speed, and drilled her on quick reflexes. Under his guidance, Clara's aim grew sharper. Her shot started hitting closer to the bullseye, earning her small nods of approval from Jack. Those moments of validation fueled her motivation even more. Despite her growing skill, the ridicule didn't stop. Ryan, the same man who had mocked her on her first day, seemed determined to make her feel inferior. Whenever Clara walked into the range, he rolled his eyes or muttered sarcastic comments under his breath. Once, he even went so far as to call her Miss Daisy, implying that someone like her would never need to use a gun in real life. Clara chose not to engage. Instead, she channeled her frustration into focus, letting his words push her harder rather than bring her down. One particularly challenging session stands out in Clara's memory. The group had gathered for a friendly competition, each shooter taking turns to see who could hit the smallest target at the longest distance. When it was Clara's turn, she felt all eyes on her. Some watched with curiosity, while others sneered, clearly expecting her to fail. As she lined up her shot, she tuned out the noise, focusing only on the rhythm of her breathing and the weight of the gun in her hands. Pulling the trigger, she watched as the bullet struck the edge of the target. Not perfect, but better than anyone expected. The room fell silent for a moment before Ryan broke the tension with a snort. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, though. His tone lacked its usual confidence. Clara didn't respond. She simply stepped aside, allowing the next person to take their turn. Inside, however, she felt a spark of pride. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just improving for herself. She was proving something to everyone who doubted her. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's transformation became impossible to ignore. She moved with purpose now, her posture straighter and her movements deliberate. Even the sound of her gunshot echoed differently, crisp, controlled, and precise. Jack often praised her dedication, telling her she was one of the fastest learners he'd ever seen. "You're going places, Clara," he said one evening as they packed up the equipment together. "Just keep pushing." But Clara's journey wasn't just about mastering firearms. It was about discovering strength she didn't know she had. Each time she pulled the trigger, she reminded herself of why she was there: to protect her family, to conquer her fears, and to prove that she was capable of more than anyone thought. Though she still faced skepticism and doubt, Clara refused to let it define her. Instead, she used it as fuel, knowing deep down that her hard work would pay off someday. Little did she know, that day was closer than she imagined. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the air carried a hint of chill but the sun still shone brightly, casting golden light over everything it touched. Clara had spent her morning at the library helping a group of elementary school kids pick out books for their reading project. The laughter and chatter of children always lifted her spirits, and as she locked up the library for the day, she felt a rare sense of calm. Deciding to stretch her legs before heading home, she took a leisurely walk through downtown, enjoying the colorful leaves scattered across the sidewalks. As she strolled past a high-end hotel, something unusual caught her attention: a commotion inside. At first, it sounded like raised voices, perhaps an argument between guests or staff. But as Clara paused to listen more closely, the tone of the shouting grew clearer. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Someone was pleading, their voice trembling, with desperation. Curiosity tugged at her and she stepped closer, peering through the glass doors of the hotel lobby. What she saw made her stomach drop. 3 masked men were dragging a well-dressed man toward a black van parked just outside the entrance. The man struggled against their grip, his expensive suit wrinkling as he fought to break free. One of the kidnappers barked orders, while another held what looked like a gun pointed at the captive's head. Clara's heart began to race. She froze for a moment, unsure if what she was witnessing was real. Her mind scrambled to process the scene before her. This wasn't a movie. This was happening right here, right now. For a split second, doubt crept in. Should she call the police and stay hidden? What could she possibly do against armed criminals? But then she remembered all those hours at the shooting range, all the times she'd pushed herself to improve despite the mockery and doubt from others. This was why she had trained, for moments when courage mattered most. Taking a deep breath, Clara forced herself to act. She looked around quickly, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. Nearby, a fire extinguisher hung on the wall next to the hotel's emergency exit. Without overthinking, Clara grabbed it, smashing it hard against the glass door. The sound of shattering glass echoed loudly, startling the kidnappers. They turned, their heads sharply, momentarily distracted from their hostage. Seizing the opportunity, the captive wrenched himself free and stumbled backward, putting some distance between him and his captors. The kidnappers shouted angrily, clearly frustrated by the interruption. One of them, clearly the leader, pulled out his gun and aimed it in Clara's direction. Time seemed to slow down as she stared down the barrel of the weapon. Fear clawed at her chest, but she refused to let it paralyze her. Years of practice kicked in as she steadied her breathing, recalling Jack's lessons about focus and precision. Dropping the fire extinguisher, she spotted a fallen guard's pistol lying near the shattered doorframe. Without hesitation, she lunged for it, her fingers closing around the cold metal grip. Now armed, Clara crouched low, using the broken doorway as cover. Adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her senses. She knew this was no longer just about protecting herself. It was about saving an innocent person whose life was hanging by a thread. The kidnapper who had aimed at her stepped forward menacingly, his finger tightening on the trigger. Clara didn't wait. Drawing upon every ounce of skill she'd honed at the range, she steadied her aim and fired a single decisive shot. The bullet struck true, hitting the man's hand and causing him to drop his weapon with a cry of pain. Shock rippled through the group of kidnappers who faltered, unsure of what to do next. Clara seized the moment, shouting loudly to draw attention. "Call the police," she yelled to nearby bystanders, who had been watching in stunned silence. "Get help now." Her voice snapped people out of their daze, and several rushed to dial 911. Meanwhile, Clara kept her pistol trained on the kidnappers, her hands steady despite the chaos unfolding around her. Though her heart pounded wildly, she maintained her composure, refusing to back down. The kidnappers exchanged panicked glances, realizing they were losing control of the situation. One of them tried to grab the injured leader and drag him toward the van, but Clara's sharp command stopped them in their tracks. "Don't move," she warned, her voice firm and unwavering. For the first time in her life, Clara felt truly powerful, not because of the gun in her hands, but because of the courage within her. She had faced danger head-on, and she wasn't going to let these men hurt anyone else. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Relief washed over Clara as she realized help was on the way. The kidnappers hesitated for a moment longer before abandoning their plan altogether, scrambling into the van and speeding off. Clara didn't pursue them. Instead, she stayed focused on ensuring the safety of the hostage and the bystanders. As the dust settled and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, Clara finally allowed herself to breathe. She lowered the gun, her arms trembling, not from fear but from exhaustion. The man she had saved approached her cautiously, his face pale but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice shaking. You saved my life." Clara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. In that moment, she realized something profound. Her journey at the shooting range hadn't just prepared her for self-defense, it had prepared her to be a hero. And though she couldn't have predicted it, her actions that day would change her life forever. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, slicing through the tension that still hung thick in the air. Clara stood frozen for a moment, her mind trying to catch up with the whirlwind of events she had just been thrust into. Her hands, still gripping the pistol tightly, trembled slightly, not from fear this time, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She glanced around, taking stock of the scene. Shattered glass littered the ground. The black van was long gone, and people were beginning to emerge from their hiding spots, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. The man she had saved approached, her again, his expensive suit now disheveled and stained with dirt. Up close, Clara recognized him instantly. Alexander Drake III, the billionaire tech mogul who frequently appeared on magazine covers and television interviews. His sharp features and piercing blue eyes were unmistakable, even in his current, disheveled state. But instead of the confident, larger-than-life persona he usually projected, Alexander looked shaken, vulnerable even. He extended a hand toward Clara, his gratitude palpable. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice hoarse but sincere. "You risked your life for me today. I'll never forget that." Clara hesitated before shaking his hand, feeling oddly out of place. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone receiving praise from someone as influential as Alexander Drake. "I just did what anyone would have done," she replied modestly, though deep down she knew that wasn't entirely true. Most people wouldn't have stepped in. They would have called the police and stayed safely out of harm's way. But Clara hadn't hesitated. Something inside her had clicked, urging her to act. By now, police cars screeched to a halt outside the hotel, their flashing lights casting red and blue hues across the scene. Officers poured out, guns drawn, shouting orders as they assessed the situation. Clara quickly explained what had happened, her words tumbling out faster than she intended. She described the kidnappers, their van, and the moment she fired the shot that turned the tide. The officers listened intently, jotting down notes and asking follow-up questions. One officer, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, placed a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "You did good," she said firmly. "Real good. Not many people would have handled themselves like you did." Clara nodded, though she still felt unsure about whether she had truly done enough. Had she acted recklessly? Could things have gone worse? These questions swirled in her mind, but she pushed them aside for now. There would be time to reflect later. Meanwhile, reporters began arriving on the scene, alerted by eyewitnesses who had captured snippets of the incident on their phones. Microphones and cameras surrounded Clara almost immediately, bombarding her with questions. "Who are you?" one reporter asked. "What made you step in?" Another pressed. Clara blinked against the bright lights, momentarily overwhelmed. She wasn't prepared for this level of scrutiny, especially not after everything she'd just endured. Alexander stepped forward, shielding her from the onslaught. "This woman is a hero," he declared loudly, his commanding voice cutting through the noise. "She put herself in danger to save my life. If it weren't for her quick thinking and bravery, I wouldn't be standing here right now." His words drew murmurs of admiration from the crowd, and some bystanders even clapped, moved by the story unfolding before them. Despite Alexander's efforts to deflect attention onto her, Clara remained humble. When prompted to speak, she simply said, "I'm just glad I could help. No one deserves to go through something like that." Her straightforward response only added to her mystique, painting her as an unlikely yet undeniable hero. As the authorities took over the investigation, Clara found herself sitting on the curb, sipping water offered by a paramedic. Her legs felt wobbly, and her thoughts were a jumble of emotions, relief, pride, and a lingering sense of disbelief. How had this ordinary day turned into such an extraordinary event? She replayed the moments in her head. Marv. The days that followed the kidnapping attempt were a whirlwind for Clara. News of her heroic actions spread like wildfire, turning her quiet life upside down. Reporters camped outside her modest home, hoping to catch a glimpse of the librarian sharpshooter, as the media had dubbed her. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from strangers offering congratulations, interview requests, and even book deals. At first, Clara was overwhelmed by the attention. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, let alone having people celebrate her as some kind of local legend. Ethan, her teenage son, handled the situation with a mix of pride and teenage embarrassment. On one hand, he couldn't stop bragging to his friends about how his mom had taken down kidnappers and saved a billionaire's life. "That's my mom," he told anyone who would listen, puffing out his chest. On the other hand, he teased her relentlessly about the nickname the news outlets had given her. "Librarian sharpshooter? Really? What's next, Supermom?" He joked, though his grin made it clear he thought it was pretty cool. Despite the chaos, Clara tried to keep things normal. She went back to work at the library the following Monday, hoping to return to her routine. But the moment she walked through the doors, she realized that wouldn't be possible. Her co-workers greeted her with applause, holding up a handmade banner that read, "We're so proud of you, Clara." A table near the entrance displayed newspaper clippings and photos of her from various articles. Clara laughed nervously, feeling both touched and slightly embarrassed by the gesture. Word of her bravery reached the shooting range, too. When Clara returned for her usual Saturday practice, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The same people, who had once mocked her, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. Ryan, the man who had nicknamed her Miss Daisy and teased her mercilessly during her early days, approached her hesitantly after her session. "Hey, Clara," he began, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I just wanted to say, what you did was incredible. I didn't know you had it in you." He paused, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Anyway, I'm sorry for all the crap I gave you before. You proved me wrong." Clara studied him for a moment, then gave him a small smile. "It's okay," she said simply. "We all make mistakes. Just remember, everyone has untapped potential, even if they don't look like they do." Ryan nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. As he walked away, Clara felt a sense of closure. She hadn't held any grudges against him or the others who had doubted her. Their mockery had only fueled her determination. Still, it was nice to see them acknowledge her growth, and perhaps learn something from it. Meanwhile, Alexander Drake III kept his promise to stay in touch. True to his word, he reached out within days of the incident, inviting Clara to meet him at his office downtown. Nervous but curious, Clara accepted the invitation. When she arrived, she was ushered into a sleek, modern conference room where Alexander waited, dressed in a tailored suit and exuding the same charisma she'd seen on TV. "I can't thank you enough for what you did," Alexander began, his tone sincere. "You risked your life for mine, and I'll never forget that. But more than that, you inspired me. You reminded me that heroes come in all forms. Not just the flashy ones we see in movies, but everyday people like you." Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unused to receiving such high praise. "I just did what I thought was right," she replied softly. Alexander leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "And that's exactly why I want to offer you a chance to inspire others. My foundation focuses on empowering women through education and self-defense programs. I'd love for you to join us, to share your story and help train others to protect themselves." At first, Clara hesitated. She wasn't sure she was cut out for public speaking or teaching, but as Alexander explained his vision further, she began to see the possibilities. This could be an opportunity to turn her experience into something meaningful, something that might help others feel as empowered as she did now. After some consideration, she agreed to give it a try. As weeks turned into months, Clara embraced her new role with the same dedication she had shown at the shooting range. She traveled to community centers and schools, sharing her story and demonstrating basic self-defense techniques. People listened intently, inspired not just by her courage, but by her humility. Everywhere she went, she emphasized the importance of believing in oneself and pushing past fear, lessons she had learned firsthand. Back at the shooting range, a plaque was eventually installed in her honor, commemorating her bravery and skill. It read, "To Clara Bennett, a true hero who proved that courage knows no bounds." Clara smiled when she saw it, humbled by the recognition. But more than anything, she was grateful. for the journey that had brought her here, for the people who had supported her along the way, and for the chance to make a difference in the lives of others. Through it all, Clara remained grounded, refusing to let fame change who she was. She was still the same librarian who loved books, the same mother who cheered Ethan on at basketball games, and the same determined woman who refused to give up when the odds were stacked against her. And yet she was also so much more. A symbol of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of ordinary people. Clara's new role with Alexander Drake's foundation marked the beginning of a chapter she could never have imagined for herself. At first, stepping into the world of public speaking and advocacy felt daunting. Standing in front of a room full of strangers, sharing her story, wasn't something that came naturally to her. But Clara had always been someone who pushed through discomfort, and this was no different. With each presentation, she grew more confident, finding her rhythm and learning how to connect with her audience. Her talks weren't just about recounting the day she stopped the billionaire's kidnapping. They were about resilience, courage, and believing in oneself even when others doubted you. She spoke openly about the ridicule she faced at the shooting range, the countless hours of practice, and the moments of self-doubt that nearly made her quit. Her honesty resonated deeply with people, especially women who often felt overlooked or underestimated. After one particularly moving session, a young woman approached Clara with tears in her eyes. "I've always been told I'm not strong enough," the woman said softly, "but hearing your story makes me think maybe I can be." Clara smiled, warmly placing a hand on the woman's shoulder. "You already are," she replied. "Strength isn't something you're born with, it's something you build piece by piece. Trust yourself." These interactions became some of Clara's favorite parts of the job. Knowing that her words might inspire someone else to take action, to stand up for themselves or pursue their goals, filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't known before. As word of her work spread, invitations poured in from all over the country. Clara traveled to cities she'd only ever seen on maps, speaking at conferences, community centers, and schools. Each place brought its own unique challenges and rewards. In rural towns, she met women eager to learn practical skills, like self-defense and firearm safety. In urban areas, she connected with groups focused on empowering marginalized communities. No matter where she went, Clara tailored her message to fit the needs of her audience, ensuring they walked away feeling capable and inspired. Back home, life continued to change in subtle but meaningful ways. Ethan, now thriving in high school, took pride in his mother's accomplishments while still teasing her good-naturedly. "Mom's officially cooler than me," he joked to his friends, though his admiration was evident. The two of them spent evenings together watching old movies, laughing about how surreal everything had become. Despite her busy schedule, Clara made sure to carve out time for Ethan, reminding him that family came first. At the library, Clara's co-workers celebrated her success alongside her. They organized a small event to honor her contributions, complete with cake and heartfelt speeches. One co-worker summed it up perfectly. "Clara isn't just our librarian anymore, she's our hero, and we couldn't be prouder." Even Ryan, the man who had once mocked her mercilessly, reached out again months later. This time it wasn't an apology, it was gratitude. "My sister heard you speak last week," he told Clara during a chance encounter at the shooting range. "She's been struggling with confidence, but your story really helped her, so thank you." Clara nodded, touched by the unexpected compliment. "I'm glad my story could help," she said sincerely. "Tell your sister to keep going, we're all stronger than we think." Despite her growing fame, Clara remained humble, never letting the attention go to her head. She declined lucrative offers for book deals and TV appearances, preferring to focus on grassroots efforts that directly impacted people's lives. To her, the real reward wasn't money or recognition. It was seeing the spark of determination in someone's eyes after they realized their own potential. One evening, as Clara sat down to write a speech for an upcoming event, she reflected on how far she'd come. From being the quiet librarian everyone overlooked to becoming a symbol of empowerment, her journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet, At its core, it was still the same story. A simple woman who refused to give up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The next morning, as she prepared to leave for another speaking engagement, Ethan handed her a small note. "For luck, he assy." Years passed, and Clara's story became a beacon of hope for countless people. What had started as a personal journey to protect herself and her son evolved into something far greater, a movement that inspired others to find strength within themselves. Her name was no longer just Clara Bennett, the librarian. She was now recognized as a symbol of courage, resilience, and the belief that anyone, regardless of their background, could rise to the occasion when it mattered most. The shooting range where she had once been mocked transformed in subtle but significant ways. The plaque honoring her bravery remained prominently displayed near the entrance, serving as a reminder of what determination could achieve. Newcomers often stopped to read it, some even snapping photos to share with friends or family. Ryan, who had once teased her mercilessly, became one of her biggest supporters. He frequently told new participants about Clara's journey, using her story to encourage them not to give up when things got tough. "You think you're bad at this? Look at Clara," he'd say with a chuckle. "She went from missing the target entirely to saving a billionaire's life. If she can do it, so can you." Clara occasionally visited the range, though her visits were less frequent now due to her busy schedule. When she did show up, she was greeted warmly by everyone, new faces and old ones alike. Some asked for advice on improving their aim, while others simply wanted to thank her for inspiring them. Each interaction reminded Clara of how interconnected people's stories could be. Her actions hadn't just changed her life, they had rippled outward, touching lives in ways she might never fully understand. Her work with Alexander Drake's foundation continued to thrive. Over time, Clara helped expand its reach, introducing programs tailored to underserved communities, and creating scholarships for women seeking training in self-defense and leadership. The foundation also partnered with local libraries, including Clara's own, to host workshops and provide resources for those interested in learning more about personal safety. It was a full-circle moment for Clara, blending her love of books and knowledge with her passion for empowerment. One day, while preparing for a workshop at her library, Clara received an email from Alexander. Attached was a photo of a mural recently unveiled in a park downtown. Painted across the vibrant canvas was a larger-than-life depiction of Clara holding a book in one hand and a pistol in the other, a nod to both her roles as a librarian and a protector. Below the image were the words, "Courage takes many forms." Alexander wrote simply, "Thought you'd like to see this. You've earned every bit of it." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she stared at the picture. She hadn't expected such public recognition, but knowing that her story had become a source of inspiration for strangers filled her with gratitude. That evening, she took Ethan to see the mural in person. Standing before it, she felt a mix of pride and humility. "What do you think?" she asked him, nudging his shoulder playfully. Ethan grinned, hands shoved into his pockets. "It's pretty. Cool, Mom. But I still think Librarian Sharpshooter has a better ring to it." They laughed together, the sound echoing softly in the quiet park. For a moment, Clara allowed herself to soak in everything, the challenges she'd overcome, the lives she'd touched, and the legacy she was building. None of it had been easy, but every step had been worth it. As time went on, Clara began mentoring young women, passing down the lessons she had learned along the way. She taught them not just about marksmanship or self-defense, but about believing in themselves and embracing their potential. One mentee, a shy teenager named Mia, reminded Clara of her younger self, hesitant, unsure, but eager to grow. Watching Mia gain confidence over the months brought Clara immense joy, reinforcing her belief in the power of encouragement and perseverance. Looking back on her journey, Clara realized that her greatest triumph wasn't stopping a kidnapping or becoming a public figure. It was discovering her own strength. She had faced ridicule, fear, and doubt, yet she had pushed through them all. In doing so, she had proven something invaluable. Heroes aren't born, they're made. They're ordinary people who choose to act when the moment calls for it, who refuse to let fear define them, and who inspire others simply by being brave enough to try. On a crisp autumn afternoon, much like the one years ago when everything changed, Clara stood in front of a group of women at a community center ready to deliver another speech. As she looked out at the sea of faces, she saw determination, curiosity, and hope. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak, her voice steady and clear. "We all have moments when we feel small, insignificant, or incapable," she said, pausing to let her words sink in. "But inside each of us is a spark waiting to ignite. Trust yourself, push past the doubts, and remember, you are stronger than you know." The room erupted in applause, but Clara barely noticed. Her mind drifted back to that fateful day at the hotel, to the trembling hands that had once struggled to hold a gun, to the woman who had dared to step forward despite the odds. She smiled to herself, knowing that her journey was far from over. There would always be more lives to touch, more fears to conquer, and more lessons to learn. And so, Clara continued forward, one step at a time, proving again and again that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about moving forward anyway.